Okay, good morning. So we're now starting a new Siman Kuf Samach Beis, the how to actually do Netilas Yadayim. So the Mishnah Berurah gives a very useful hakdama before we even start the Shulchan Aruch. So let's start with that. So it's Siman Kuf Samach Beis, and the hakdama is in Sifkot and Aleph. Akdim hakdama katzara. Says the Mishnah Berurah, I'm going to give you a little intro. Kafiyah mavu b'tur beis Yosef b'yes hapoiskim, which is brought there, kadeshi isbaru eil hasifim, to explain the coming sifim v'hu. Hinin isbar b'sim kuf nun ches v'tam netilas yadayim hu mishum yadayim askon yeshem. The whole reason we wash our hands is because the yadayim, the hands, are busy. V'lochein gozru alein tuma, because they've touched parts of the body which are normally uncovered, and therefore Chazal will geyser because they've become Tamei. Unless you pour a revius of water over them. And therefore you have to wash your hands twice. Why? Because the first pouring is going to cleanse your hands, but the water have touched Tamei hands, and therefore the water itself is Tamei, because they've become Tamei from your hands. And therefore the second pouring is going to actually be matayah them, and that will complete the whole tahara process. If, however, you pour a revius of water at one shot over your hands, or at least over each hand, certainly, you don't really need a second pouring, because you've done it all on one time, and therefore they've just sort of gone onto your hand and been matayah them. And that's indeed what the Mechab is going to say later. The Gemara says that when you wash your hands, you should lift them up. The worry is that the water which has become Tamei might go down to your wrist if you hold them up. Because if they sort of go back, if your hands are down in a downward action, and therefore the water has gone up to the wrist and beyond, they might trickle down back to your hands, and the Tamei water might sort of slip down and be Tamei them once again. Of Pirsham Farshim, Dahainu, it might go above the wrist, which is above the prescribed area for washing, and therefore they might not be matayah them, because the water that you washed a second time will only cover the netila place, i.e. from the wrist downwards, but not above that. The tumas yadayim b'tarosim who had perek dafka, because we know tumas yadayim is dafka till the wrist. V'lochein im ein magbia yodov, if you don't raise your hands, yachzru hamayim hatmeim hoheim l'teicha perek v'tamei yadayim. In other words, if your hands are like that, you're going to be okay. But if your hands are down like that, so then the water that may have trickled above is going to go down again onto your hands and will re-matame it. V'lochein im ein magbia yodov yachzru hamayim hatmeim. Well, if according to their explanation, even if you wash your whole hand until the wrist, I'm three wide lines down in the Mishnah Berurah, in the Hakdama. We have to be worried if you should raise them because of this concern. Okay. V'yesh cholkin, 4 lines in. V'yesh cholk for wide lines. V'yesh cholkin osfir lehu. T'chashenotel kol pisas hayad adakona k'min hogenu. When you wash your entire hand from the wrist, like we are noheg, lo chashinan shema yetzu hamayim chutz l'mokom hazeh. V'yachzor, we're not worried about it. V'ika chashashu rak shelo notel ki'im kishri etzba'osof. There are others who explain that the whole concern is when you only wash till your knuckles, you just wash your fingers. Because many poskim say that me'ikar din, you only actually have to wash your fingers till the knuckles, that's it. Now then, they have a different concern, because they're worried at the time of washing, a bit of the water would go above the fingers, would go, in other words, on the palm of the hands, to koshel sham, because it's hard to get it exactly right. And therefore, memela, the water has become Tamei. And the second water, when you wash a second time, hasn't touch that part because you've only washed your fingers, according to that opinion. And unless you go like that and you raise your hand like that, in other words, it's not the water which is above the wrist, it's the water which is over here, because according to this opinion, you've only washed your fingers, and the water on the hands has become Tamei. You didn't touch that place the second time, and that's going to go back and touch the fingers again. The Mechaber is making on this because the Chaim b'Seif HaSeif. Okay, so the concern is that the water may touch parts of the hands which have not become washed, and therefore it touch either above the wrist according to the first opinion or above the fingers over here somewhere according to the second. And if your hands are downward, they're going to just run down and be rematame your hands. Therefore, yagbiem, hold them up, and therefore there's no concern that Tamei water is going to go back into your hands. That's really what's going on over here. Okay, let's do the Mechaber. Hanoitel tzarich lagbia yodov. Someone who washes his hands should raise them. The hainu rosh etzba'os lemala, i.e., you should raise your fingers upwards. Shelo yeitzu mayim chutz leperek v'yachzru v'tames hayadayim, that they shouldn't go beyond the wrist and therefore contaminate the hands once more. Says the Ramah, Hagov, hu adin im mashpila mitzchila sanatila ad sofa de shapidome. If you lower them down at the beginning, you shouldn't raise them and then put them down again. Because then you might come and be metamei yadayim again. Says the Mechaber, if you don't wash the entire hand, but if you wash the whole hand in one go, we're not worried about that. But there are those who are cholik on that. Like the Mishnah said in the Hakdama, if you do a revius in one go, the ein shamayim tmeim klal, therefore there is no Tamei water in any at all. Ein tzarich lagbia yodav, we don't have to worry about it. And Lamaisa, we're going to see that at the end of the Mishnah today, that's going to be the conclusion. V'chein hamat bil yodav ein tzarich lagbia yodav, and so too if you do not Netilas Yadayim but Tevilas Yadayim, for example, you dip it in a mikveh, into a river or something like that, yesh omrim, you don't have to worry about that. V'yesh omrim d'im shofech al yodav gimel pa'amim, if you wash 3 times, ein tzorech lizoy b'chol zeh, you don't have to worry at all. V'chein noagu lahakel, and we can be noig like that. Okay, to be mekel. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Sifkot and base. Okay, so this is going on the opening words of the Mechaber, hanoitel tzorech lagbia yodov. We're in Kuf Samach base, Sifkot and base. Says the Mishnah Berurah, if you didn't do it, you don't have to wash it a second time, unless you actually saw water trickle down, water that had gone above the wrist that had now trickled down. Unless you've seen that, you don't have to worry about it. Sifkot Gimel, Lagbir Yodov, Tekav Acha Maim Shnim Ad HaNiguv. Now, after you've washed, you should just raise your hands like that the water shouldn't now go and re-metama your hands. Because maybe water had gone out before you've done the second washing, chutz leperek, above the wrist, v'hem tmei mikvar, and therefore they may become tamei, shekiblu tuma al yidei hayadayim, v'acha hamayim shniyim yodu lemata v'yitamu yadayim, and then this water will sort of trickle down and will re-metame your hands. V'toiv lizohe afilu be'is nesina, gufa liyos yodov b'hagbo. Even when you put your hands, when you actually wash them, your hands should be somewhat elevated. Uledas harashbo hamuva b'beis Yosef tzorich medina lizoy bezeh. Mikadin, you've got to be careful that your hands should be slightly upward when you wash them. V'hinei ef shelekai mitzvahs hagbo yodov. Now, how are you going to do that? Ela b'sheshofech achar al yodov. That's only possible to wash your hands when they're in an upward state, when somebody else is actually pouring water on them. Because when you're washing your own hands, because by nature, when you're pouring like that, pouring onto your hands are going to be going downwards. So how are you going to keep your hands up if you're washing your own hands? So obviously somebody else is washing your hands. That's what we're talking about. And if you're not, there's no one else to wash your hands, which is going to be for most of us 99% of the time. You just make sure there's a revius on each hand. to benital revius bevasachas ein sorech lagbia yoda, because when you've washed your hands with the revius, there's ein sorech lagbia yoda v'chud lekame, like the Mechaber said later on. V'shas atchak she'en lemayim kol kach yaso eitza hamveres b'haga ta'anu sheyash b'yodav legarim mitchila netila ad sofa. That you just wash mitchila netila ad sofa. Yeah. That you keep them down the whole time. Rosh Yetzbois of Hainu Ladas HaPoskim Le'el B'Simin Kuf Samach Aleph. We had a machlokas, where do you wash till? The Sagi Ben Netilas Kishra Yetzbois of that opinion says you only have to wash your fingers till the knuckles of Ladas HaPoskim Le'el Shom the Tzorech Netila Kol Hayad. You have to wash your entire hand. The Mele Tzorech Lagbia Gamkein Kol Piziyad. You have to make sure the whole hand is raised. The Yesha Pirshu, and there are those who explain Gam Kavonis Rosh Yetzbois of Kein Hu Shemagbia Kula, that you raise the entire hand. Elad Mefarish Ofen HaMagbor. They just explain how you do the Hagbah. Hainu sheyu rosh etzbois of lamala v'akaf hazrei lamatzot, that your hands should be up and the wrist should be down. Shelo yetzu rotzoloma d'shema yetzu hamayim harishonim atzmeim chutz leperik. The first lot of water that became Tamei from touching your askonios hands would have gone below the wrist and then can sort of trickle down. If you haven't raised them, yachzor hamayim lematzav yitamu hayodayim. Okay, v'hu adin sifkot involved im mashpilan the kevin de shpilan mit chilas hanatila shamayim harishonim halomei kar lo yotzu hamayim klal chutz leperik. If you've lowered them from the beginning, they're going to trickle down. Therefore, no Tamei water is going to go back onto your wrist. Ad sofa, hainu ad acha nasinas maim shniim, until the end of the second washing. Aval acha kach shapidami. After that, there's no problem. Once you've washed your hands twice, then there's no concern at all, because all the water is tahar, and therefore there's no concern. That which the Gemara says you should raise your hands, or if they were straight, if they were flat, maybe they went down beyond the wrist. And therefore, in that situation, when you only wash once, then you've got to make sure that they stay downwards, that they stay up, so that they haven't gone back to the fingers. But if you've kept them down, then if they were kept down from the very beginning, therefore there was no concern that they ever rode up your hands. Sif cotton test, this is going on the end of the Mechaber, Yachzu v'itamu hayodayim. So the kam achrein mefakim al eitzazu, that the hashpola, that they question the Ramaz eitza, that you should keep your hands down. The Ramaz said, if you're mashpilan the mitchila al sofer de shapedomi, in other words, you raise them and then you lower them. He says they question that because when they're lowered down, they may not have touched all the fingers properly. That you should raise them from the beginning. That you should raise them even from Kabbalistic reasons. You should raise them. You raise them and then you wash them. Now, this is important. People are not very careful about this. Because at the end of the day, you pour a whole revius on each hand, and even they wash to the ends of the wrist. From the wrist. It's very important, you've got to be careful, the water covers or touches every part of the finger. Not like a lot of people, says the Mishnah Berurah, yeah, you've seen people do this. You see people wash and they just like pour over their hand over there. They haven't even touched, the water hasn't even touched their fingers. So you've got to make sure you pour generously over the entire hand and make sure it covers all the fingers. Sif cotton yud, avlem noitel, hatam kosav nelel, but it's alef ein shom, v'yesh cholkim bezeh, usfir l'hu d'l'olim tzorech lag b'yeh yadav, you actually have to raise your hand, not like the Ramah said, v'ayim be'el yirabah shekosav de'ik k'yesh cholkim hazeh, that we should follow the yesh cholkim, the raise your hands from the whole time. V'hu das reiv ha'mefarshim, mikol mokum b'shas hatchak. However, for whatever reason you can't raise your hands, certainly nowadays we wash with a revius of water, therefore there's less of a concern. Let's just finish the sif. And certainly if you've had a whole revius on each hand. We'll get there, Shem. The ein sham maim tameim. The ma da omrinon maim rishonim. Tameim, that's only if you wash with a little bit of water. Because if you dip your hands in a river or in a mikveh, there's no mayim tameim anyway, so there's no concern when it comes to tefillah. And that's the lemaisa what we do. We should wash each hand with at least a revius, and lemaisa we wash way more than a revius. Revius again is like a third of a becher, right? So we're washing with the proper kli, b'shofi with berevach, and therefore there's not a concern. The chanal b'simin kufnam ches we made lo yitztorich ledaktik ba'bosim medina, and therefore, strictly speaking, this whole sif is not so practical and relevant to us because we're washing our whole hands with much more than revius. Certainly, if we wash each hand separately, the chanal v'chein luchach. The requirement for 3 is not really needed. So if we just wash our hands properly with plenty full of water, there's not really a concern about this need to be magbia the hands. Okay, say the cult of Yossi.